When you look at the most iconic video games of all time, half of them are beautifully architected sagas of true literature. And then there's Nintendo. They typically didn't believe in sequels, keyword being typically. The best we got as fans were ancillary stories, but now we're seeing some direct follow-ups. My conspiracy theory, that very well may be wishful thinking, is that after being first to the party on everything else, they're finally showing up fashionably late to the idea of narrative continuity on a broader level. The fact that Switch 2 is the first system they've ever made that didn't change anything, and just built upon it, is the start to the fuel of the fire for my conspiracy theory. Star Fox is being rebooted to set up for a true narrative run. Before getting into the game, let me start with the man behind it. If you don't know who Shigeru Miyamoto is, let me introduce you to the Wilt Chamberlain, Michael Jordan, and LeBron James of video games all in one man. He's been perhaps one of the biggest reasons Nintendo has been so successful, though with all due respect, he's had moments of his later career that mimic MJ's late years over LeBron's later years. And a lot of this comes down to two things that I don't know for certain, but I'll say hyperbolically anyways. Miyamoto hates stories, and Miyamoto loves novelty. Reportedly, he used Mario as his characters putting on a play. He cared more about the plastic peripheral for Link's crossbow training than any of the actual lore of Twilight Princess. But just like LeBron is adapting his game to not let the game pass him by, Miyamoto is finally letting Nintendo evolve past mechanical novelty into the actual storytelling. With the release later this week, Star Fox 64 makes up nearly 45% of the Star Fox games ever made, with the natural progression of Star Fox 64, Star Fox 64 3D, Star Fox Zero, and Star Fox 2026 all being the same game, if you're not being generous and counting the first two games as beta for Star Fox 64. The other two on GameCube were pseudo-sequels to 64 and Don't Ask About Command. Of all 8 games out now, I think most people would agree that Star Fox 64 is the best one, and they want a different game. I think that's the goal. I think this is a series reset pitched as a cinematic remake because they're testing how much of an audience there is for Star Fox before greenlighting any real work on a sequel, especially with a new audience. There's a reason Star Fox 64 keeps getting made, however, and it's a problem I call pinnacle impingement. The visual I want you to think of is being pinned down by the atmospheric pressure at the peak, trapped by the problem of achieving nigh perfection. With that in mind, if you're unfamiliar with the game, think of every major sci-fi trope pre this millennium in one. You're a hotshot mercenary ace pilot hired to save everyone you know from this evil emperor, who's a mad scientist who killed your father. Along the way, you systematically push back the evil forces of this emperor, Andros, from the last bastion of good guys all the way to his underground base. You cross paths from everyone from your childhood friend to your squadmate's ex. You can go toe-to-toe with the man who betrayed your father, who's now flying with your rival mercenary squad, Star Wolf. On top of that, you have continued dialogue from your team and your own boss, as well as from enemies, bosses, and even Andros on stages he's not on. Most of the dialogue is solely focused on the trajectory that is you versus the guy who killed your dad, and that guy is threatening everything. Another massive portion of those exchanges is how this is your opportunity to redeem your father's greatest failure and live up to his legacy as one of the most amazing pilots ever. And then you do. It's a great game with a lot of replayability I won't get into here, but having such an amazing story comes with a problem. You're at the summit, and where do you go from there? You got oxygen to go upwards, suffocating from your own success as you've already used the biggest tropes. You're impinged by having achieved the pinnacles, and the sky feels the limit pushing back down on you. And you have nowhere up to go, but there's a fear in going back down. How could it be the high before? How do you move on from a perfect peak? And right after those questions, how do you follow up a magnum opus without it being a letdown? If you ever climbed a mountain, you know there's no burden of Atlas as the sky gets heavier. In fact, it's the opposite. It's harder to breathe the higher you go up, but the thin air isn't the only problem. As you make that sunward descent, the intensity of the light gets severe with less sky to shield you. Which is why I'd propose if you're in pinnacle impingement, you need a shadowy out, which I'd call an eclipse awakening. You might think the simplest solution is the best, just make a new villain, but I don't think it's that simple. When it works in other games, the narrative was built into the foundation from the beginning, or at least expanded on through an off-screen story. But Nintendo's usual methods don't work quite the same here. Mario is about levels and gameplay, which story never gets stale. You almost look forward to it being reinvented, like a reunion with friends. Bowser sure as heck didn't kill your dad when you were a kid, and every enemy you face isn't dissect why you'll never succeed against their amazing leader. Ganondorf has a mystic reason for a reset, and nearly every game has no continuity anyways. If you pilot at Andros, you have the exact same plot of taking down your lifelong enemy, which is what longtime fans of Star Fox are tired of. Or you're fighting someone who has to compare to that. There's no room to innovate, which is why Miyamoto turns to what he loves to innovate the most, mechanics. Writers took the story in all sorts of direction, but Star Fox has struggled not to feel lackluster following the brightest lights. And it's not just an issue of weaker gameplay. It's in part because if you're not moving up, it's going to feel like you're moving down. Even if you use Fox's mom, most of the ways you do it would be a lateral move, not an advancement. The best sequels take what already exists and expand upon it. Well, you don't have room to expand, you have to introduce a new element for a soft reset. Something that hid in the eclipse of the first game and can slowly awaken to lead you to a different summit using some shade from the sun. To stay concise, I think this means two things for Star Fox. 1. The sequel needs a new X factor to grow beyond Andross's experiments, and 2. The sequel needs an antagonist who fills the void of a deeply personal connection while also imposing a great danger. To do this, Nintendo needs a soft reset, let the story change from an epic space opera to a slow-burn thriller that crescendos into a major sci-fi fight for the Lylat system at the end. It's admittedly not very algorithm-friendly to go in my full pitch as my second video with 7 subscribers. But if you want to, check out my Patreon for my pitch on a 4-game series later next week, as well as 4 spin-off ideas coming up in the next 2 weeks or so following. I don't want to leave it just there and ask you to try a free trial on a different website, so wrap up with this hopeful middle ground. Star Fox 64 has temples everywhere, and they introduce a character in the sequels who have special powers that many would assume are just magic. In fact, perhaps the most memorable villain outside of Star Fox 64 is Panther, in addition to Star Wolf. You play as Fox, and you've got this will they won't they with this new telepathic Fox girl who's now part of the team, and Panther might as well be your creepy rival for her affection, to oversimplify. He's memorable because in the first minute his role is established, just as your squadmate's ex and your childhood friend were from their first few lines, and Panther brings immediate tension to this situation. The series never lets you feel quite the same connection with any other villain they've introduced, at least not one that lives up to Andross's giant shadow, but awaken a personal story with someone from Andross's forces who had reason to be eclipsed by the events of the first game, like Makarov in Modern Warfare or the Arbiter in Halo, who plays a role with the rise of a new threat. Combine that with a Fox girl's mystic background, and you've successfully taken cover to make it to a new mountain through the shadows. You've gotten out of the pinch by navigating new, unexplored terrains that are overflowing with potency. It doesn't feel like an inherently lesser view. In fact, it sets you up for a bigger summit as Game 3 could be a crowning corona, leaving you to pull at the thread. What is Andross really working on, and what is the source of magic in Star Fox? The problem with Star Fox Pinnacle Impingement isn't the heights. So the mountain is no place to launch a spaceship. It's sci-fi in space, giving you a nigh infinite number of elements to expand. You just need the proper runway. Summiting Everest was a massive human achievement in the early 20th century, but those climbers aren't household names the same way the Apollo astronauts are now. And right now, Star Fox is Everest. It's stuck in the mountain. It just needs the narrative engineering to build a craft capable of leaving orbit. It needs to escape by the shadow of some eclipse and make that culminating ascent to even greater stakes. But like Star Fox, I'll need my own sequels. I'm planning to tackle the Halo remake, followed by Tomb Raider. If you enjoyed this, please subscribe. It genuinely helps. I have no intention of asking for subs once I hit 1,000, and right now, I'm less than 1% of the way there. Stay safe, and I hope you're doing well, whether you're at a summit or in a shadow season of life.